a short introduction to Coleridge, and then we will be reading his poem Kubla Khan, which you have in your syllabus. So we have completed Tintern Abbey by Wordsworth, and now it is the turn for Coleridge's poem. Now you have read about Coleridge, so you know about him, because in your history of English literature you read about Coleridge. Now I will just mention some facts about Coleridge. So Coleridge, along with his friend William Wordsworth, he is regarded as one of the major figures of the Romantic Revival in England. His dates are 1772 to 1834, so he was 2 years younger than William Wordsworth, but he died in 1834, long before Wordsworth died. And he was Wordsworth's closest poet friend during the movement, that is the Romantic Revival. And as you know, the publication of the lyrical ballads, that was a momentous event, and uh, these two poets collaborated. Uh, and Coleridge's part in the making of the lyrical ballads, as you know, that he was bringing in his own words, quote, willing suspension of disbelief for the supernatural, so unquote. So this is what he was trying to do with a supernatural touch in some of the poems. Actually, he contributed 4 poems to the lyrical ballads. Now he studied in Jesus College, and later on he studied about German metaphysics. He was interested in them, in the writings of the German philosophers, and Coleridge is actually regarded as an important uh, critic also, not just a poet, because you might have heard about his Biographia Literaria, which is a kind of a book on uh, fancy imagination, the primary imagination, the role of the secondary imagination, all these things. Now let us move on to Coleridge as a poet. And during the Romantic period, of course, there were different poets who were writing, and as we can see that uh, during this time Coleridge was in fact like his friend William Wordsworth. He was also uh, enthused by the French Revolution, and Coleridge, uh, as you know, he was more interested in the supernatural aspects, and his influences, it came from various exotic sources, and uh, he can be said to have some of the following qualities, which I am going to uh, explain. Actually, uh, kind of the first thing that we can note about his poetry was the artistic treatment of the supernatural aspects. So he would treat the supernatural in a very artistic way in such poems as Kubla Khan or The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Christabel. Now there was the second feature was a kind of medievalism, going back to the medievalism, which is a feature of Romantic poetry. Uh, the third one is a combination or a connection between human nature and external nature. So the reciprocal, uh, relationship. The fourth quality is a kind of a creation of a dream world, and that is authenticated by this process of psychoanalysis. And last two qualities actually is imaginative flights and lyricism. Karibullah, do you want to ask me anything? You have raised your hand, that is why I'm asking. If you want to ask me anything, you can do so. Do you have any question? Uh,
শুনতে পাচ্ছেন?
হ্যাঁ, বলো, what do you want to say?
বলছি আমাদের ওই থিওরি এক্সাম কোন মাসের দিকে হবে একটু বলতে পারবেন স্যার?
The exam. Now, let us move on again to this discussion. So these are some of the features of Coleridge's poetry. Now, this poem, Kubla Khan, it has a kind of a, history. Each poem has its own history, but this poem, it has a very interesting kind of a history. Now, this poem was written in 1797, and Coleridge at first, he did not want to publish this. He was not interested in publishing this poem. He had written this poem, but he was not interested to publish this, and he published this poem at the request of Lord Byron. As you know, that Lord Byron was one of the important poets in the Romantic period, and he published this poem in 1816. So as you can see, almost 19 years after he composed this poem. And the book where it was published, it had an introduction, and that introduction, it gives us some idea about the circumstances that prompted the poet to write this poem. Why had he written this poem, and under what circumstances? So I'll be reading from a passage which explains why Coleridge wrote this poem. Quote, "In the summer of the year 1797, the author, then in ill health, had retired to a lonely farmhouse between Porlock and Linton on the Exmoor confines of Somerset and Devonshire." So Coleridge is writing this himself, and he's referring to the summer of 1797, and he's saying that I was in ill health. He's referring to himself in the third person. So he was not well, and he had gone to recover, to spend his leisure time, or in order to recuperate, to a lonely farmhouse between Porlock, Porlock, and Linton, Linton, on the Exmoor confines of Somerset and Devonshire. Somerset and Devonshire are the two counties. So this farmhouse was situated between these two counties on the Exmoor confines. In consequence of a slight indisposition, an anodyne had been prescribed, from the effects of which he fell asleep in his chair. At the moment that he was reading the following sentence or words of the same substance in Purchas's Pilgrimage. So he was reading a book called Purchas's Pilgrimage, that was written during the Elizabethan age, a book of voyages, that is, to different lands. And he had been taking medicine. Actually, he had been taking opium. Anodyne means medicine. Here, the Khan Kubla. So that this is the description. Here the Khan Kubla commanded a palace to be built, and a stately garden thereunto, and thus 10 miles of fertile ground were enclosed with a wall. So he was reading this sentence, and then he fell asleep. Uh, The author continued for about 3 hours in a profound sleep, at least of the external senses, during which time he had the most vivid confidence that he could not have composed less than from 200 to 300 lines. So in his dreamlike state, he was composing the poem, and it was a very long poem of about almost 300 lines. So he was in a half asleep state. If that indeed can be called composition, in which all the images rose up before him as things, with a parallel production of the correspondent expressions, without any sensation or consciousness of effort. So it was a strange kind of feeling that he was having. On awaking, he appeared to himself to have a distinct recollection of the whole, and taking his pen, ink, and paper, instantly and eagerly wrote down the lines that are here preserved. So he woke up after 3 hours of sleeping, during which time he had been composing this poem in a dream state. And when he woke up, he remembered exactly the lines that he had composed in his dreamlike state, and uh, he started to write them down. At this moment he was unfortunately called out by a person on business from Porlock, and detained by him above an hour, and on his return to his room found, to his no small surprise and mortification, that though he still retained some vague and dim recollection of the general purport of the vision, yet, with the exception of some 8 or 10 scattered lines or images, all the rest had passed away like the images on the surface of a stream into which a stone has been cast, but alas, without the after restoration of the latter. Unquote. So this person from Porlock came to him and on some business matter, and he had to, that is Coleridge, had to talk to him for over an hour. And when Coleridge was, ultimately he obtained his release from this person, he went back to his desk, and he found, he was very sad to find that he could no longer remember the uh, you know the lines that he had composed in his dream. So he could write only a few lines, and the images, the lines, they have disappeared. So Coleridge says that the poem is a fragment, and that too of a dream. So it is a dream, a poem which came to him in a dream, and uh, the whole poem, of course, he could not remember the whole poem. It is a fragment, in a fragmentary state. So actually, uh, Coleridge was apologetic about it. He wanted to say, and that is why perhaps he was a bit hesitant to publish the poem in the year 1797 when he had written that poem. But he published the poem much later at the request of Lord Byron. Now he is saying to the readers, so not to take this poem too seriously, and there should not be any deeper meanings. So, but however, of course, uh, critics have not listened to him, and the poem has been analyzed in different ways, and different meanings have been sort of made of it. Now, the gist of this poem, I'll tell this to you, the substance, what is there in the poem, what is Coleridge saying in this poem. The substance is that Kubla Khan was an ancient powerful king of China, and he was the grandson of Genghis Khan. You must have heard about Genghis Khan, who was a great Mongol ruler, and he was a very powerful and cruel king. And this Kubla Khan was his grandson, and he ruled China, uh, and he ordered the building of a majestic pleasure house in a place called Xanadu. So uh, this was his summer capital, that is Xanadu, and there is the reference to a river called Alph, which ran through Xanadu, and thus this place Xanadu had a very fertile land, and the course of the river was through dark and immeasurable caverns, and finally the river entered into a dark sea. Uh, 10 miles of land all around this kingdom was fertile land, and the emperor, that is Kubla Khan, he had ordered it to be fenced in with walls and towers, and it had bright gardens, winding streams, and very lovely trees bearing sweet smelling flowers. There were also forests which were quite ancient, and there were green patches of wood, and it was a sunny place. Then we get the description of how a powerful stream of water gushes out from a gorge, and it drops to a kind of a, it goes into the ground again. And in the last part of the poem, we how we see the image of a young maiden who is dancing, and the image of an inspired poet. So this is the, in short, the kind of interpretation of the poem. And now I will move on to this poem, and you have the text with you, so please refer to the text, and I will now share with you this text. Kubla Khan. And this is the poem Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So let us read this poem, and we will find that this has a beautiful rhythm, a very beautiful rhythm. So Kubla Khan, or a vision in a dream, a fragment. So Coleridge calls this a vision in a dream or a fragment, for the reasons as we have seen. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So the first lines of the poem, the first 5 lines, as you can see, there is the reference to this place called Xanadu, and this is the name of a city, and this corresponds to the modern Shantung city in China, Shantung, Shantung city in China. And Coleridge, as you know, he was reading Purchas's book, and he found that this city was earlier called Xanadu or Xandu, Xaindu. So actually the name has been changed, uh, and as we find this, that actually this was called Zamadu or Zandu, Zamadu, Xamadu. But in the poem that Coleridge has written, he makes this Xanadu. So the name has been changed, and uh, as we can see here, the reference is to Kubla Khan. And who was Kubla Khan? As I have told you, he was the grandson of Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan was the founder of the Mongol dynasty in China. And he built the city of Beijing and made it the capital city. So Kubla Khan actually was instrumental in building the city of Beijing. It was called Peking earlier. That is the former name of Beijing. And uh, this city of Beijing was made the capital by Kubla Khan. And you must have heard about the Italian explorer Marco Polo. Marco Polo visited Kubla Khan there, visited his court. And it is from Marco Polo's accounts we come to know that Kubla Khan was a lover of art and learning. So this is a piece of news that has been recorded by Marco Polo. So in Xanadu with Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree. So a pleasure dome is a stately palace. And Xanadu was the summer capital, as you know, for Kubla Khan, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So Alf, the sacred river, ran. Alf is an imaginary river, and it cannot be found in any map as such. And Coleridge actually had read about the river Alpheus, 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 and this was a river that was associated with the Nile. And perhaps in his dream, Coleridge shortened the name of this river Alpheus, and he refers to this as Alf. And as we can see here, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So the sacred river, it was considered to be having some religious or divine qualities by the Chinese people, by the subjects of Kubla Khan. And this was a very distinctive kind of a river. Why? Because it was running underground through caverns measureless to man. Caverns means deep hollows in the ground. And it ultimately joined the sea, a sunless sea, meaning that was also under the ground. So a sunless sea would mean that it was not above the ground. So it was there uh, down the under the ground. So in the first 5 lines, Coleridge has talked about, or he has informed his readers about Kubla Khan and how this stately palace was built down to a sunless sea. Okay, so twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So as it is described here, here there were actually, as we can see, twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round. So walls and towers were girdled round, meaning 5 miles, twice 5 miles, 10 miles. So this sacred river had made the ground fertile, and Kubla Khan ordered that 10 miles of such fertile ground should be surrounded, should be walled in, and that was done, girdled round. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills. So as we see here, that there was a very beautiful gardens, not just one garden but a number of gardens, and through which uh, there were winding streams. Sinuous means winding, and rills means streams, where blossomed many an incense bearing tree, and there were found in these gardens trees bearing sweet smelling flowers. And here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So here were found uh, forests as old as the hills. So they were ancient forests. And in the midst of those forests, there were green, grassy patches of land, bright with sunshine. So sunny spots of greenery. The sun shone on them, and the forests were full of greenery. So this is the description of the place where Kubla Khan's palace stood. So this is the first stanza, and here you will find kind of an introduction. Coleridge gives us some kind of an introduction to the place and the natural scenery, the natural beauty of the place. So being a true nature lover, like his friend Wordsworth, he also gives us a beautiful picture of the scene here. Now, in the next stanza, we suddenly see that there is a kind of supernatural aspect to this scenery also. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover. And there was a remarkable thing, and that was a deep, mysterious, hollow-like shape which went down into the hill, and it was a kind of a gorge. And there were a number of cedar trees. Cedar trees are very lofty, big trees. A savage place, as holy and enchanted as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. So this was a place, Coleridge called this a savage place. Why? Because this was a place which was a kind of a savage and desolate place, like one uh, that would be imagined to be uh, haunted by a woman who uh, was in love with a demon, and who had been coming there in the light of the uh, waning moon, and after having made love to her, he had departed. So this is a kind of a supernatural reference, as we find here, to this demon and this woman who is lamenting for her demon lover. So it was a mysterious as well as a kind of a frightening kind of a place. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced. So here is the description of a powerful spring of water which was gushing forth from this gorge. And deep down there was a kind of incessant turmoil. So as we see this description, this ceaseless turmoil seething. So inside the ground, in this place, some turmoil was going on, some kind of disturbance was going on, as if the earth was breathing fast, and this panting of the earth resulted into a big throw of water, which carried along with it big and small chunks of stone, which were rebounding hail or scattered grain when beaten by the thresher. So this is the description, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing. A mighty fountain momently was forced, a gush of water that is, amid whose swift half intermitted burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. So the description is of a natural turmoil that is taking place here. That is a big fountain of water which is coming out forcefully, and different chunks of stone which are also being released from the uh, underground. So huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, uh, like a hailstorm that might occur. So swift half intermitted burst. So it was a very quick, and this was occurring from time to time. So this is a kind of a personification of the earth, as you can see, as if the poet is imagining the earth to be a kind of a human being who is panting or who is out of breath. So it's like this. And the way this fountain was coming out and the fragments of stone, they were being released like rebounding hail. So it appeared to be like the grain that was being beaten by the thresher's flail. So it was like this process of how the thresher uh, beat the scattered grain on the granary floor. Now, as we can see here, and mid these dancing rocks at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river. So the sacred river was actually, it was running underground. But suddenly, at one point, we find that this sacred river comes out from its hiding place, you may say, and it is moving out. For some place, the sacred river is running over the ground. 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion through wood and dale, the sacred river ran. So for 5 miles, the river ran over the ground, and then it disappeared into the earth again, and it met this sunless sea. Sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. So the description is of this river Alf, which followed a meandering path, a zigzag course through wood and valley, and it ultimately reached the deep and dark caverns, and then fell with noise in the lifeless ocean. So this is the meandering motion of the river, as this is being described by Coleridge, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. So suddenly, amid the lot of noise that was being generated because of the sound of the water coming out from underground, the rocks that were being hurled from the inside of the earth, and Kubla Khan, as if he could hear this tumult, amidst this tumult, all this disturbance, that is, he heard from far away the sounds of the kind of oracles, the voices of his ancestors. They were prophesying war. That is, they were talking about the destruction of this place, that there would be a war soon, and Kubla Khan's uh, pleasure dome would be destroyed. So this idyllic place and palace would be destroyed in war. So this is what the message that the ancestors of Kubla Khan were uh, communicating to him. So this stanza, you can say that it builds up the kind of momentum. It builds up a kind of a scenery which is full of mystery, it is full of beauty, and there is a touch of foreboding at the end of this stanza, where the ancestors of Kubla Khan, they were prophesying war, that a great war would set in. So this is the description, as you can see, and how this place is kind of haunted, or it is mysterious, and some supernatural beings like this demon had haunted this place once. And the whole description has a kind of a rhythm, and when we read the poem, this poem actually has a very lilting kind of a rhythm, and we would find that uh, the motion of the river as it is flowing ceaselessly, sometimes under the ground and sometimes over the ground until it reaches that sunless sea, that the motion of the river can be felt by the readers as they read this. Uh, in the next part, the poet is saying, the shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. So the shadow of this dome of pleasure that Kubla Khan had ordered to be built fell on the waves in the middle of the river. So this river, when it came out of the underground, for 5 miles it was running above the ground, and the shadow fell on it, floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. So many sounds came from the fountains and the caves. Uh, they resounded, they got mixed up, the sound that came, and the effect was like an orchestral music, though it was a harsh kind of music, not a very sweet music as such. And it was a miraculous sight, for the pleasure dome that stood as we see it. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. and everyone marveled at the kind of picture that they saw there, the picture of the dome, the pleasure dome that stood on caves of ice, and sunshine had fallen. So it was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. On the one hand, the place was sunny and warm. On the other, this pleasure palace that Kubla Khan had ordered to be built, that was actually standing there, and it stood on caves of ice. Now I will read the next part of the poem in my next class, because it is an important part, section of the poem which needs to be explained clearly. So let us stop here today, and as you can see here, this poem Kubla Khan is a remarkable poem uh, in the history of romantic poetry, and how what was the we have seen how the poem was composed, and how Coleridge was, as we saw in that account, how he was disturbed, how he was stopped from composing or writing this poem down.